is for you to I'd encourage you to speak to my team and have my team feed this upwards through your departmental directors of research and innovation as well. There's a growing momentum, I think.
There is.
Yeah, so this is actually an active item of discussion in the University PGR Committee and in the Research Strategy Group, so it's definitely on the agenda.
Yeah.
There was another one? Just one more.
I don't know how many people in the room have students who are nearest their side on the bench, but if you're collecting sort of patient data and a student is not on a drug trial sitting, then KICS, we're talking to KICS about RedCap, web-based data capture system, which is basically free for people in the university to use because we have subscriptions to the system. So you can't use it for those studies that are at higher levels of sort of regulation, but it's a very good local solution.
Right. Again, in the interest of time, I think we're going to have to let you go.
I will run now. Sorry.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay.
Right, so you've had the double act, and now we're going to do a triple act. So I'm going to kick off the PGR challenge, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleagues Ali and Dan, who are going to be your quiz masters for the second part of this section. So this time last year, you may remember I told you about the questionnaire the exit questionnaire that we'd launched in the faculty as a tool to aid in developing and improving the experience for our postgraduate research students. By the end of May this year, 46 students had completed the questionnaire, and there were some common themes beginning to emerge from their responses, and we thought it was a good idea to look at the data in more detail. Now, there's a lot here, but I'm just going to focus a little bit on certain things. So basically, candidates were asked to, or the graduates were asked to rate their level of satisfaction in various different aspects of their PGR experience, from very dissatisfied to very satisfied. And this graph shows the degree of satisfaction of the students for different aspects of the programme, shown on the left. And they're shown in the different colours. And the good news, I think, is actually that most of our students are pretty satisfied, which is excellent news for all of us. If we look at those areas of provision where 10% or more of the students are either dissatisfied or very dissatisfied, there are 5 areas, I think, where we can improve. The first is in the progress monitoring, then the support received from your supervisory team during thesis preparation, desk space, always an issue, the opportunities provided to present your research findings at seminars and conferences, which I think is surprising to me, and then the support provided by your personal tutor. So these are areas we'll be focusing on over we continue to focus on these areas. Students are also asked to provide free test comments on their experience, and again, these are usually very positive, and I've selected just a few of them here. I really like this one. It really changed my way of thinking, made me more critical, insightful to theories and clinical practice, gave me self-confidence to conduct independent research, and I developed presentation skills. Then there are others which are a little bit more critical. I think this one's very pertinent. And then there are others that are beginning to raise some concerns, particularly this one. My supervisors were intimidating and very limited in their concern for my well-being. The research culture in my department is very poor and will continue to remain very low till supervisors make an effort to actually support students. Okay, so I'd like to focus on this one a little bit more. This editorial appeared in Nature a few weeks ago, and it was prompted by a very high-profile case of bullying and racism that occurred at the Max Planck Institute for Astrophysics. And this led them to undertake a survey, an anonymous survey of 120 researchers at the Institute, of whom just over 50% responded. And amongst them, there were 3 allegations of bullying and 2 reports of sexual harassment. And the writer of this editorial highlighted the difficulties that researchers face when they find they're experiencing bullying, and said that your friends tell you to complain, but you're afraid of repercussions and of losing the opportunity you fought so hard for. And anyway, you don't know who to trust. Interestingly, as I've shown from our data from the exit questionnaire, and that was only just representative quotes, But we're also getting feedback from our postgraduate research representatives who sit on our faculty research committee, graduate research committee, and also they have their faculty forum. And they tell us that there are students in our faculty who are experiencing bullying, but they are afraid to complain, because they're worried about the repercussions that this might have. Now, the person at the centre of this bullying controversy was someone called Guinevere Kaufman, and she actually corresponded with Nature to explain her alleged behaviour, and I think her comments are quite interesting. This is what she said about racism, but I'll just go through what she said about bullying. She said, "I am of the generation that was subjected to very high pressure supervision. I realise that this has now become unacceptable. I believe I have modified my behaviour very substantially in the last 18 months since the complaints were made." And then she goes on to say, "Our procedures for evaluating graduate students and providing honest feedback are still not uniform in my opinion. Approaches vary greatly from keep quiet if the student is not doing well and let him or her sink in the exam or job market, to attempt to steer them towards a successful career with all your strength. I believe I fall into the latter category. Nobody I had trouble with ended up quitting astronomy." Now, I don't know about you, but some of these comments actually resonated quite a lot with me. I have colleagues, my contemporaries, who had very difficult and unhappy times as PhD students, and who, looking back on their experiences, would say that they were bullied. But they just accepted it. They got on with the work, and they didn't complain. Equally, I think that we all feel it is our responsibility as supervisors to ensure that our students do well. We want them to do well, and we want them to succeed in life. However, we may not recognise that the pressure that we're putting them under could be seen to be, it's maybe unacceptable, it could be seen to be harassment or bullying. We also need to recognise that not all doctoral students will be aiming to have research careers in academia. That the PhD degree provides the basis for a wide range of interesting careers. This was not an isolated case. There have been a number of examples recently, high-profile examples in the literature. For example, we've had Professor Nazneen Rehman, who will be leaving the ICR in October this year after some very serious allegations of harassment and bullying. Then we had the empathy researcher, Tanya Singer, who was accused by 8 colleagues of intimidation and bullying, one of whom said that whenever anyone had a meeting with her, there was at least an even chance that they would come out in tears. And then, just in case you think I'm focusing just on the women, there are some men, okay, and there's this high-profile case of Indra Verma, who had to step down as the editor of PNAS after several allegations of, several women came forward accusing him of sexual harassment. And with regard to sexual harassment, there was a survey carried out by the NUS not long ago among students, current and former students. I think they were mainly undergraduates. And 40% of them reported at least one experience of sexualised jokes, comments and unwanted touching from staff. 2% of those current students who responded said that they'd experienced non-consensual sexual contact, and 0.6% of them said that they'd been sexually assaulted or raped by a staff member. Okay. Right, so why am I telling you all this? Well, what's the take-home message? I think it's that we, as supervisors, need to be aware of what constitutes bullying and harassment and ensure that we behave responsibly in a way that respects the rights and dignities of others at all times, and that we recognise that what we may think is acceptable behaviour may not be acceptable to others. And how do we do this? Well, I think I would start by recommending we all read the University's Dignity at Work policy, which is available on the HO web pages, and which states that the University does not tolerate bullying, harassment, discrimination or victimisation, and as far as possible complaints will be managed speedily, confidentially and communicated effectively. We're not just trying to protect our students here. Research funders now, like the Wellcome Trust, now have policies on bullying and harassment, and failure to adhere to these policies can result in withdrawal of funding, as has happened in the case of Nazneen Rehman recently. We'll be working with our students to improve and increase awareness of complaints policies, so that students who are experiencing difficult situations will not be afraid to come forward. I'd also recommend the relevant compulsory and optional training resources that are available to us all as members of staff, in particular the suite of e-learning resources which are available from HR, and you can access these on MOLE, and they're listed here. And of course we've got some excellent workshops which are run through the Supporting the Supporters programme, and we circulate details of these at regular intervals from the graduate school. And with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, Dan first, and Dan Lambert, who's the PGR lead for the dental school, who's going to take you through, act as quizmaster for part of our PGR challenge, and I'm going to hand over to Alan. Okay.
Okay, so thank you, Martina. As Martina says, I'm PGR lead for dentistry and have been for nearly 8 years now. So I've seen lots of things being done very well in that time, but I've also seen problems that can arise. And Martina, Ali and I have put together a list of short scenarios, yes or no answers, for things that might occur in the course of a PhD, which could, rarely do, but could provide grounds for academic appeals, which obviously we want to avoid and the students obviously want to avoid as well. So these generally will fall into the categories of procedural error, misconduct on the part of an examiner, extenuating circumstances, and failure of supervision, which obviously is potentially difficult to define, but we'll run through a few cases where that might be construed to be the case. Okay, we were going to do this on the clickers, and then we were talking about put a hand up, but I don't think I particularly want to publicly shame if someone puts their hand up to the wrong one. So I think if we go through these one at a time and just have a pause to think about what you think out of these could be considered to be a procedural error. So number one, and this is one I've come across quite a lot as a bit of misunderstanding around, the supervisor organising the viva. So the university regulations are quite clear that the supervisor should not organise the viva. The student also shouldn't organise the viva, which may occur occasionally. The internal examiner or the internal coordinator should organise the viva. Now, well, actually, I'll come back to that slightly with on one of these later points. That may not be a surprise to any of you. As experience tells me that perhaps may be a surprise to a few. The viva was organised before the thesis was submitted. So normally examiners would be appointed before the thesis is submitted, but the viva shouldn't actually be arranged until the thesis is submitted. I assume this is to avoid unnecessary stress on students with a date approaching for a viva that they therefore have to submit the thesis by and rush it through. Supervisor nominated the examiners. I guess we're going back to the first question here. That is okay. So that's not a procedural error. As I'm sure most of you are aware, that's normal practice. Nominate the examiners, yes. Organise the viva itself, no. As I say, that may come as a bit of a surprise. And then we come across some thorny ones, and we had an example of this in the dental school recently. What if the external examiner is a former member of staff? You might think that's a procedural error, but it's not, as long as it isn't within 4 years of them leaving the university. So these are sort of thorny issues we come across that it's good to be aware of if you think you're appointing a former member of staff. Another thorny one, perhaps, the internal examiner has a close personal or business relationship with the supervisor. This would be a procedural error and should be declared. the internal examiner checked the Turnitin report before the thesis is dispatched from the university, so that isn't a procedural error because that's normal practice. And the last one on here, which I added late on, is availability of the supervisory team. So the regulations state that a member of the supervisory team should be available. It's actually prior and after the viva to meet with the examiners. Now, I'm sure occasionally this could raise problems, but it's certainly one to be aware of, because I think occasionally that hasn't been the case around the faculty. Okay, so failure of supervision. I mean, obviously these things aren't necessarily black and white, but these are just giving you a little bit of guidance on the sort of things that might occur. So a student justifiably claiming that a supervisor didn't provide advice on subject-specific knowledge and skills training, so not providing the training required, that could be seen as a failure of supervision. There are records of 30 supervisory meetings over the course of 3 years. This is for a full-time student. That wouldn't be seen as a failure of supervision. That would be normal good practice. As we know in reality, many of us will meet with our student more often than that, but if we have records of that sort of number of meetings. Records of 10 in year 1 and then 8 over the remaining time. Well, we started off well, but then the records of meetings have dropped, and that could be seen on an appeal as a failure of supervision. The supervisor didn't read or didn't provide feedback on the confirmation and review mini-thesis, which is a formal monitoring point, a formal assessment. Well, I think that could be grounds for a claim of failure of supervision. Annual progress reports. I think we've all occasionally experienced difficulties in getting everyone to sign off these reports. In this case, the first supervisor but not the second supervisor has completed the reports. That would be okay because you've got a report there from the primary supervisor. It is sometimes difficult to get everyone to fill in these reports within the window that we have. Okay, a few more. So the supervisor reads and provides feedback, constructive feedback, on just one draft of the thesis. Well, I don't think that could be claimed to be a failure of supervision. If the supervisor's been through the whole thesis and provided feedback, even if it's just one draft. The supervisor has a planned absence of a significant period of time and doesn't make alternative supervision arrangements. I think you're probably all aware in here that that wouldn't be ideal and could be grounds for an appeal. I mean, obviously sometimes these situations can be complex, but if it's planned, then really arrangements should be possible to be put in place. Supervisor goes on annual leave when a student is approaching submission. I'm sure we've all had this. It may not be ideal, but it wouldn't be grounds for failure of supervision, because really it should have been planned for. We certainly get a lot of questions around travel to conferences and funding for travel to conferences. It is a bit of a thorny area. In this case, the supervisor has recommended the student joins the society and then suggests they attend the annual meeting, but doesn't provide funds to enable attendance. And so that's not really grounds for failure of supervision. It's been signposted, and there are other opportunities to apply for funds beyond it being the supervisor's responsibility. Supervisor has provided constructive feedback on the thesis, but hasn't corrected the use of English. I've had some interesting conversations with external examiners over the year around this issue, but it isn't our job to rewrite the thesis, but to give feedback. So that wouldn't be, however much a student might like it to be, that wouldn't be a case for failure of supervision. Okay, so a few extenuating circumstances. Now the first one perhaps looks a bit bizarre, but strangely I have actually come across this happening. Not in this university, but I'm aware of this happening. So the student is provided the details of the viva the day before and decides to go ahead. very unusual circumstance, and I think there could be grounds for extenuating circumstances there. That sort of very, very short notice shouldn't occur, and the student may feel under pressure to go ahead. So say it probably looks a bit strange, but I have come across an example of that happening. Student receives formal diagnosis of a specific learning difficulty after submission of the thesis. Again, that could, probably would be considered extenuating circumstances. The student is ill on the day of the exam but decides to go ahead. Again, depending on what the nature is, it could be considered for extenuating circumstances. And the examiners subjected the students to in-depth questioning. Dear oh dear. During the Viva, and for which they are not prepared. I think we all probably agree on that one. Okay, so there's a few examples there, some straightforward yes-no answers. I'm sure many of you would be quite happy with most of those, but hopefully there was the odd one that made you have a think. And with that, I'll pass on to the real quizmaster. He's going to run you through a few situations arising.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, so I've got a tough challenge because there's quite a few of them with a lot of words, and I've got about 10 minutes to do it in, so I'll revert back to my Scousism and talk really fast. So these are, if you like, situations that might arise that could potentially get some supervisors into trouble and could also, you know, maybe be accusations of bullying or harassment. So we go through these. Okay, so your student arrives into work on Monday morning and regales you with the details of their weekend, which include dyeing their hair bright green, they've had a heavy drinking session, and they've visited a tattoo parlour. They now have a colourful hair, a tattoo on of the university crest on their thigh, and they offer to show you it. Okay, so we've got 5 options for what you should do in this scenario. Do you ask to see the tattoo? Do you comment on the hair and say, you know, it doesn't suit you, I think you should dye it back? Do you reprimand them on the improper use of the university crest? Because we all know that there are proper uses of the crest. Or do you suggest that they may wish to be a little bit more careful next weekend and not have so many Jaeger bombs? Or do you say that you're not interested in hearing about the private life and no, you do not wish to see their tattoo? I'll leave you to ponder that a minute, but what we would suggest is D&E. Obviously, you know, we're in a professional situation here and we should be maintaining a professional relationship with our students. Sometimes this might be difficult over the course of 3 or 4 years of how we get, you know, sort of closely involved and talk to our students. And, you know, you might have a little bit of a joke with them if they're in the 3rd or 4th year maybe, but I would strongly suggest that actually, you know, you tell them that their private life is a private life and definitely don't have a look at the tattoo. Okay, scenario 2. Your first year student arrives in your office in a state of distress. They have received some bad news about a close family member and is soon in a flood of tears. You feel bad because they're unhappy and you want to help. So again, do you just tell them to take the rest of the week off and go home? Sit them down for a while, offer them a cup of tea, give them a hanky, give them some time to gather their thoughts? Do you put your arm around them, wipe away the tears with the hanky, try to calm them down, you know, really reassure them? Or do you just send them to the personal tutor to deal with, because after all, that's what they're there for, right? Or do you signpost them to support and actually mention a leave of absence if it's likely that the situation could lead to prolonged periods of distress? Need to think about that one? So we would probably recommend that, you know, you don't have to be so aloof with your students and so professional that you can't actually take out time to think about their welfare. And actually Martina pointed out earlier on from an exit survey, you know, students have said that you know, my supervisor's got no interest in my personal welfare. So, you know, and we're all human, sit them down, you know, maybe offer them a cup of tea. But we definitely recommend that you signpost them to the support And then also, you know, if it is a significant distress that might mean that they're going to have to take weeks off, you know, really seriously consider whether a leave of absence is required in this instance, because actually this can then, you know, stop the clock and give them some time at the end. So, scenario 3, a bit more, maybe, you know, fine lines here. It's a Saturday evening, and you're submitting, you know, you're putting the finishing touches to a paper that was drafted by one of your students. There's just one final detail that you need to check before you submit. You know the student can clarify this query in seconds without them having to, you know, refer to the notes. So it doesn't matter if they're in the tattoo parlour, right? They can reply to you. So do you call the students, you know, on their mobile and ask for the information over the phone? Do you send them an email and request for the information? Do you send them a text and ask them for the information? Or do you wait until Monday and ask the students for the information then? So again, this is a little bit of a grey area, I think, and also it's about expectations as well. We would recommend that if you do send it the email, that you actually put a caveat in that you're sending it now because you need to get it off your head now, and if you don't do it now, you forget it on Monday, but we don't expect you to reply until Monday, stroke when you're in the lab. Or even wait till Monday and ask the student then. We'd also, you know, sort of query you and sort of suggest that you talk to your students when they first start about the expectations of communications and what are acceptable forms of communications and when. You know, and you know, should you have the personal mobile number of your students? Should they have your personal number? You know, maybe think about how you communicate with students. And there are things such as Slack. I don't know whether you guys use this. It's it's an app that you can actually have on your mobile, so you know it's accessible, but you don't need to see the mobile number of the team members that are in there. And it also has like an office hour as well, so you can sort of set up expectations of when you can communicate with your students and when they can communicate with you as well. So scenario 4. You're concerned about a student on your supervision. They spend every minute of the day at work to the exclusion of everybody else. They don't join in with the group activities, and you've noticed that they're not taking care of their personal appearance and have lost weight. They confided to another member of the group that they've recently separated from the girlfriend a few months ago, and they're feeling very down. So do you take them aside for a chat, ask them how they are doing, and let them know about the support available in Sheffield? Say nothing, but keep a watchful eye on them? Say nothing and encourage them to continue working as they are? Or do you ask another member of the group to keep an eye on them? So again, I think some of these questions, these answers are maybe okay, but then maybe not. I mean, we would say again, you know, tell them that you've noticed that there's something the matter, because again, you're showing them that you're interested in their welfare. Ask them how they're doing, and then signpost them to the support that's available. You don't have to solve your students' problems, but you should know where they can go to get support. And you know, there's things like there's the Sheffield Access to Mental Health, there's the White Wall, the student services as well, and we can circulate details of these at the end as well. This is a different scenario about the behaviour of the doctoral students as well. So they come and go as they like. They don't meet the deadlines. They verbally abused another member of the group. You've spoken to them informally about this, but it's not having any effect. And you've recently learned that they posted a comment about you on Facebook that could be damaging to your professional reputation. Again, what do? Do you tell them you no longer wish to be the supervisor and ask them to vacate the desk ASAP? Do you confront them about the comments on Facebook and ask them to retract them? Do you respond to the comments on Facebook with a sad face and add a comment about their behaviour? Or do you seek advice from the departmental PGR lead regarding the student's unprofessional behaviour? So again, we would suggest that you seek advice from the departmental PGR lead about the students on professional behaviour, because this does arise, and we actually do have a policy. So the medical school, actually the faculty, now has a policy on professional behaviour, and we have a distinct pathway of how to deal with this, and we have experience of dealing with this as well. So the departmental PGR leads are the best people to go to get advice and help of how to set this in process. Okay, so the last one is, so this can apply, I guess it could apply to your students, or it could apply to a student that comes to you that's your personal tutee. So, the work is fine, but there's something that's troubling them. And as they're about to leave, they mention that the supervisor has made comments of a sexual nature to them which have made them feel uneasy. And he asks you what you should do. Okay, so this is a bit more different. So do you ask for further details and make some helpful suggestions and just follow up in 6 months' time? Do you speak to the supervisor concerned about their behaviour? Do you advise the student to speak to the departmental PGR lead, or do you speak directly to the departmental PGR lead? So again, these might sort of give you, which one do we do? We would recommend that you tell the students, well actually what we would recommend that you do is you tell the student that you're not the mother, you're not the doctor, and you're not a priest. So you're not going to guarantee confidentiality, and you're there to help them best. And that you might end up speaking to the supervisor or a departmental lead or the relevant people to help them in a situation. And so we would advise both you and the students speak to the departmental PGR lead. Again, because, unfortunately, we have experience of dealing with these kinds of situations, and they are the best people to deal with this. Again, as a tutor and even as a supervisor, you don't have to, on your own, deal with and solve your students' problems. Okay, there are a network of people here to support you in doing that. Okay, so maybe some of them things, as well as giving you a bit of a laugh, that light-hearted, that they are serious, and some of the ones that seem like an innocent response to some difficult situations could actually be considered to be inappropriate, could be harassment, could be bullying. Okay, so I think we all just need to think about that. And also, we would recommend as well that when you start with students, or even now, if you're halfway through supervising a student, that you look at the code of practice. And in there on page 25 is responsibilities of the student, and in 26 is responsibilities of the supervisor as well. And I would sit down with your students and go through them, both what your responsibilities are, what the students' responsibilities are, and come up with a set of expectations about how you have a relationship with that person. What is the contact like? Different things like that. What is okay to talk about and what's not? Also, everybody in this room, actually everybody in the university, should have had to have done this compulsory, and it's at the moment the only compulsory training that supervisors have to do is supporting our students. And everybody should do that. That's a university required mandate. Lorraine's looking a bit, really? So if you hadn't done that, you should have done that, and I know I got asked whether I'd done the compulsory training in my SRDS recently, and I have, and so that's that. But, as Lorraine said earlier on, and we've both been intimate, and I think there's going to be an increase in supervisory training that's available, and that probably will be compulsory as well over the coming years. Okay, so that's me. Oh, it wasn't that bad. So there you go.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'd just like to say as well, is that if anybody has any sort of thoughts on the answers to that and really disagree with any of them answers and want to discuss it with me, I'm happy to discuss it.
Okay. Now for the last session, I want to hand over. The last session we're going to focus, it sort of follows on a little bit from what Steve was saying about Diamond and the iCase studentships and the desire to convert more of our MOC studentship to case studentship. So we decided to focus the last part of our session today on industrial contacts.
Bit of a change in
and
the
interactive.
direction, yeah.
So we've got, starting off with Karen Wilkinson from the Healthcare Gateway, who's going to talk about engaging with industry and introduce us to the topic. Okay? So that's you know what to look after. Okay.
Yeah, so real sort of change in tack now. I'm going to talk in very sort of general terms about knowledge exchange and engagement with industry, and then Paul Hatton's going to talk much more specifically about industry-sponsored PhD studentships. So, first of all, who the heck am I? I'm Karen Wilkinson. I'm a business manager at the Healthcare Gateway, and that is the faculty support for all things knowledge exchange, industry engagement, translational funding, and IP commercialisation, IP development and protection. Right, so looking around the room, I'm probably telling you stuff here that you already know, actually. So, why engage with industry? And I always like to, I think it's useful to put it in context, to think that actually no one group, whether it's academic or industry-based or in any other kind of organisation, has all the skills or all the knowledge, and working in collaboration expands that pool of skills and knowledge. It helps us to identify the real challenges out in the commercial world. So we might think we've invented the best thing since sliced bread, but actually, is it feasible to actually put it out there and reach the market or reach its intended users? So working with industry can actually put a real sense check on identifying the real challenges. Working with industry also helps us translate our work out into the real world. So universities aren't and can never be set up to market, sell, support customers, perform regulatory kind of perform kind of customer support, post-marketing surveillance, ensure that regulatory measures are put in place, put products onto the market. So what we will tend to do is, at some stage, hand over our research or hand over our work to another body to perform those kind of roles. And we do that by licensing our intellectual property. Sometimes we set up our own company, but more often than not, we'll license our work to someone else to do that. We're working with industry also gives us that kind of magic bullet access to more funds, and it works, or more different types of funds, and it works both ways. It works for us as an academic institution, and it also works for industry as well by clubbing together. It kind of opens up more doors into funding. The reason I mention industrial strategy is because I don't know if you've come across this already. So the industrial strategy is a government's plan to create an economy that boosts productivity. And to support the industrial strategy, they've created the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, and it's what everybody's been talking about over the past sort of year or so. They're channeling over 4 billion in R&D funds over the next 5 years. These funds all must be led by industry. They're made available and delivered through Innovate UK and UK R&I. So just to kind of word on funding, watch out for those. Sign up to Innovate UK mailing lists, sign up to any of the events that they've got going, which are kind of based on putting collaborations together in order to be eligible and to make yourself more ready for applying to some of these funds. There's also the opportunity to get involved in creating these calls as well, so creating the direction of these calls. We've just come out of the consultation period for Wave 3 of the ISCF, so there will be Wave 4 to follow, and that's the opportunity to work with industry to put forward those challenge areas, and then in due course the calls come out based on these challenge areas. So just thought I'd throw that in there. Before looking to engage and make contacts and set up partnerships with industry, it's really worthwhile having a think about what you have in your research groups which is of value to industry. So it could be that you have an innovation or an invention. It could be that you have knowledge on how to do a particular procedure. You've got skills, you've got facilities in-house, that could be useful. It's also worth doing quite a lot of homework before you actually make contact with industry to figure out actually how valuable that IP, that invention, that innovation, that knowledge or skills or facilities actually is. And you can do that by doing a sort of sense check on how unique it is. So, is it novel? Who else is working in this field? Has any company already put a product out on the market that you might be unaware of? It's really worth doing a quick search of Google patents, for example, or just kind of looking out there to see what else is going on in this field. And it all helps you figure out quite how valuable your work is to an external organisation. Does it meet an unmet clinical need? If it does, in what way does it meet that need? Is it plugging a gap that's currently unaddressed? Does it or is it better than current gold standard treatment? Have you talked to patients? Have you talked to clinicians? Have you talked to surgeons? Have you talked to carers? That'll help you figure that out. Does your work, if it doesn't meet maybe it does meet an unmet clinical need, but could it also improve processes or manufacturing techniques in industry? Could it help industry do something that they already do better? Does it plug that skills gap that industry has? Does it help them crack that problem that they've been trying to crack? And then you should be looking at who the beneficiaries would be of your work, which is of value. So who are the patients? How big a patient pool is it? How many customers? How many users? Do some work in that kind of area. And you might not actually know the answers to some of these, or you might not know the answers to any of these, but working with industry can help answer some of those questions. But I suppose the bottom line is do a bit of homework first. Intellectual property. So you could, once you've figured out what it is that you have of value, it's fair to say that that will actually be intellectual property of some kind. And I think there's a tendency to conflate the terms intellectual property and patents, and that's not the case. So IP essentially is a creation of mind, and it can take all sorts of forms, from just knowing how to do something specifically. Could be data, could be cell lines, could be information that you have, could be right the way through to registered IP. And by registered I mean it's been patented, or it could be that it's on the way to being patented, and it could be patentable, I guess. I guess the more unique, the higher value whatever it is that you have has. So something that has a patent already is going to be of higher value to something that hasn't. But everything has a value of some kind. I think the next step would be to figure out what you could benefit from working with industry. Is it that you need a sense check on what you're doing? Is it that you think someone's got a product pipeline that your innovation could slot into? Do you need information on the market? What could the partner benefit from? And actually, where's the crossover? Where are the synergies? Also have an idea on the mechanisms that you could put into action to take these synergies forward. So do you think that it's relevant to have a PhD student working with a company? Is there an opportunity for a industry-sponsored placement? Is there an opportunity for some kind of sabbatical? Could you go straight for applying for collaborative R&D funds together? Just have an idea of actually what's on the table. A bit about picking the right partners. I think most of the collaborations that we see come out of a relationship that already exists in some form or other, but whether it's an alumni, whether it's a personal relationship. But most of you here will know the companies that are active in your field and have some kind of contact with them already, I think. If you haven't, don't worry, there are plenty of networking events. You can come to the Healthcare Gateway and ask for advice, see who we know, ask friends, ask colleagues. But yeah, pick the right partners. Try and work with people who have a shared agenda. Try and work with companies who are research heavy. Try and work with companies, even if they don't have a lot of money in the bank, that they're adept and proficient at applying for money. So we work with a lot of SMEs. They don't have great cash flow, but some of them are absolutely excellent at applying for research grants. So pick the winners and don't waste time. Kill the projects that aren't going anywhere. I think it's fair to say that if you're having trouble getting a confidentiality agreement in place, let's say, with a company, then they're probably not the kind of company that you want to carry on working with. If things are difficult to start off with, that's probably a bad sign. So yeah, on a practical level, do your homework, set expectations when you're actually making contact with a company, when you're arranging to meet and talk with a company, have an agenda, let them know what it is that you want to get out of the meeting, ask them what they want to get out of the meeting, make sure that you've got any kind of confidentiality agreements in place that you need to do that, especially if you're going to be talking about something that's commercially sensitive. So don't disclose your ideas. Don't disclose your ideas if it's not under an NDA, especially if you're if you're working on something that is potentially patentable. Talk to the Healthcare Gateway, actually, we can advise you on all of this. Spend some time getting your pitch right, consider who the audience is, pitch it accordingly. Be clear, don't be afraid to mention sensitive subjects such as IP ownership, monetary arrangements. Businesses are used to this. I know we all kind of tend to skirt around those sort of issues. Work with support staff, did I mention? Contact the Healthcare Gateway. Yeah, and do things like sign up to Innovate UK newsletters, website, look at the websites, see what networking events are coming up. You've got the Academic Health Science Network locally, who do a lot of work in putting industry and academics together. You've got the Northern Health Science Alliance, and you've got the Gateway as well. You're probably going to have lots of ideas. You might have to kiss a few frogs, but don't be disappointed. And even the smallest kind of relationship can lead to bigger things and longer term partnerships as well. So yeah, here at the Healthcare Gateway, we can support you in the whole KE pathway, which includes commercialisation of IP, which I mentioned, and support you in industry engagement. There are some funds available to support that kind of pathway from start to finish, so whether it's train fare to visit someone, whether it's seed funding to kick off a relationship, right through to a bit more in-depth IP development. The main sources of that funding are HIVE, but we do have MRC funds as well, in the Confidence in Concepts and the Proximity to Discovery. Proximity to Discovery encourages sabbaticals in and out of the university for industry engagement. But yeah, I will hand over to Paul to go into more detail about PhD studentships. Take that with me.
Thank you, Karen. By some miracle, we're only 13 minutes late on a very busy morning, so I'm going to try and keep mine a little bit short to keep us close to finishing on time as far as possible. So I'm going to set my time over 10 minutes. So I want to just run through the benefits, really, and some of the pitfalls of working with industry, particularly with studentships. And long story short, I was pretty much converted to this in around 2005 when I took a mission over to the USA to look at the impact of conversion technology on devices in our research field. And I had a kind of a dancing moment when I realised that actually when universities work with industry, they could achieve a phenomenal amount for all of the people involved and indeed for the economy of a nation. And I was completely swept away with this at the time, so I've held this view for quite some time. As head of research at the dental school now, I'm conscious that many of my colleagues and indeed my group work extensively with industry. And I think this is our current list of all of our industrial partners who work with the dental school. And a quick survey, apologies if I missed one of your projects, and I've put boxes around those where we have PhD student engagement. The vast majority are either case studentships or they are industrially funded studentships. One or two are placements. I had a student placed on an electric company, which was a much smaller and focused thing, but at the time she still came back with some very valuable information around using a different polymer supplier. So all of these things are very valuable. So I'm going to really kind of distill the benefits and the risks of this in a nutshell in my talk. And at the risk of repeating what Karen said in one nutshell, I've been watching the pendulum travel for some time towards pushing universities to engage more with industry and end users. And that trend is not going to change. And in fact, the culmination thus far is this release of a phenomenal amount of money where the government are determined to increase the proportion of our GDP that goes into R&D in the UK. And they expect universities to deliver a better return on this investment. Irrespective of what we think, the government think we need to deliver more for the UK economy. So, a PhD studentship can be, not always, but usually, an excellent form of collaboration for the right project. And that's what I'm going to talk about very briefly now. There are lots of different kinds of collaborations, case and case-like studentships, direct industrially funded studentships, so they're going to be the focus today. But of course, there are also industrial placements that are very beneficial, and indeed small projects. We've had mixed, usually positive, but one or two mistakes when we've done small projects using PhD students in that capacity. And there isn't really time to talk about all of these things, so I'm going to talk very briefly to some degree about things I hope you know, and if you don't know, then the take-home messages. So the benefits are huge. You can use a PhD student to build a relationship with an industrial partner, because having a studentship, and as we've discussed today, managing them and directing them properly means that you invest time and energy and thought into that project, and that means that also goes into the industrial partnership around that project. It's also in the current climate a potential, working more with industry in general and with a focused PhD studentship, because sometimes it can be a pathway to impactful research. There are obvious pitfalls, again, which I haven't got time to go into, but it's about very careful and thoughtful management as well. And of course, once you have a studentship working on a project, you build that relationship, you get more ideas, you hopefully get a better rapport with those industrial partners and that industrial entity, and then it becomes a source of future projects, which means you can align for things like Innovate UK more effectively, and, well, controversial at the moment, hopefully in the future, EC projects, and of course officially right now as well. And this opens up huge opportunities for research funding that would not be available to the institution if you were on your own. They are only available for either industrially led or industrially collaborative projects. So it's potentially important. If you haven't started, you need to be starting now to think about these things. Hopefully most of us have it in a faculty like our own. And it's very educational. I've learnt a phenomenal amount. In the old days, we had this word knowledge transfer, which was the idea that we were very intelligent and we went to industry, and these kind of Luddites with their empty brains would receive us in amazement at the brilliance of what we could tell them. Of course, you discover actually they know as much as we do about other things, and some things that are complementary, and you learn a phenomenal amount from working with another industrial partner, as you would with collaborating with an academic group. Now, that's the benefits for us. Of course, there's also a PhD student involved, and quite rightly, a lot of the focus today has been making sure that we manage and get the best for our PhD students as well as for our research groups in the UK. There's no doubt in all of my PhD studentships that I've had a hand, they have benefited from working with industry. Their breadth, their perspective, their understanding of their own value, all of those things have been increased. And alongside that, I'd say that they also therefore get improved employability, and they are more stimulated. I think that sometimes PhDs, and I know I probably felt the same, you sort of talk, well, what's the point of my research? And if they're engaged with a bigger audience, including an industrial partner, they do start to understand there is value in what they're doing. And it's a really important message that I think most PhD students have to discover as early as possible in their journey. There are, however, risks. I won't pretend there are risks, and we have had one or two things that have gone awry in the course of doing this. And of course, where you've got a student involved, it's important you try and mitigate those risks. Clearly, there are delays of publication, and I consider that usually quite a good thing. This is a very competitive area, because we're trying to get a patent for something. Indeed, I think apparently talking about our recent patent that was delayed publication has gone out. Is it one from now? Yes. So it has been a delayed publication, but we will have a patent as a result, and that means that we can hopefully commercially exploit that IP. You do see misunderstandings, and clear communication in all walks of life, including with industry, is absolutely the bottom line, and I think that reduces the risk of a misunderstanding or a conflict of interest arising, but I have seen them, undoubtedly. The research can be sidetracked, and again, that's as much about being a good supervisor and having good communication with your team or with your student and industrial partner again, but it is possible to get sidetracked, and it has to be said that a PhD studentship is not always the best mechanism for working on something. Because remember, the PhDs have needs as well, and that includes getting a publication or more at the end of their PhD, and includes presenting at conferences. So we, for example, are very often deliberately put in a confidential element to a PACE studentship and a non-confidential element, so the bits the students can talk about freely, and the part that we're going to protect, because we're delivering it hopefully towards a patent or something similar. So manage correctly is the key word there. An industrial partner should enhance and not undermine a PhD. And I'd say that communication is the key point. And the other point that Karen made very, very clearly, which I should have there on the next slide, is that you use the local expertise at the university. In particular, the Gateway are very, very good. A lot of experience helping us in other groups with working with industry, and indeed in research services, there's a considerable amount of expertise that you can draw upon around contracts and best practices. So my tips and conclusions: understand your industrial needs of your partner, try and communicate as clearly and professionally as possible at all times, and see if you can do that in money. Get those things on the table, don't be embarrassed about things like that. You give them a sense of the true cost after getting it costed properly, professionally, to make it go on an envelope. I know some of us do. I honestly am convinced that 99 times out of 100 they enhance a studentship and a research project, and where things go wrong, hindsight is a wonderful thing. So I think on that note, be aware that's the trend, and I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we've actually finished on time. Are there any questions for Paul or Karen, or for any of the speakers who are here? Right. Well, thank you all very much for coming, and look forward to seeing you this time next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.